Hello, I'm Grim, and I'm going to be taking over the channel for Halloween. On this spookiest of days, Raid has released a fusion champion by the name of Gretel Hagbane, who with the help of her brother Hansel collected me a soul of a witch that I very much desired. And now it seems they've come to the realm of Teleria to terrorize their enemies in the arena.
But in all seriousness, guys, I'm Kads, welcome back to the channel, happy Halloween, and today we're going to be talking about my fusion plan to get Gretel Hagbane. And yes, the outfit is staying on for the entirety of the video. So, what does she offer here? The first thing to note is that this is going to be a traditional style fusion, meaning you have to collect all 16 of the rares, which are void in this case, fuse them into the epics, which are magic in this case, ascend them, level them up, etc., and then you can fuse the legendary that is Gretel Hagbane. Hopping over to the index, we can take a look at her skills and see if she's worth going for. In my case, my default setting is to go for every fusion, so it doesn't really matter if their kits are good or bad, but nonetheless, I like to know if they're going to be useful on my account in the near term or the far term. So, starting with her abilities here on the A1, we have a decreased attack with a decent chance to land. This looks like a 75% chance when it is booked, but if her brother is on the same team, then it becomes an AoE attack and still has the chance to, a lower chance, but still has the chance nonetheless to place the AoE decreased defense. It also grants an extra hit against targets with any buffs. Now, for the purpose of this video, we are going to talk about her in isolation, primarily just because if you're going to go for her, there's no guarantee that you're going to get her companion champion, but we'll have to see if they offer him in the future in a guaranteed event or some other type of source. So here we are with the A2, attacks one enemy 4 times, and each hit will ignore more and more defense, starting off at 10%, going to 15, then 20, and then 25%. If this attack happens to kill an enemy, then it will also reset the cooldown of the skill, so you can do this back to back. It also boosts her turn meter by 50%, which allows her to cycle back through her abilities relatively quickly. This is on a 3-turn cooldown when booked. And then lastly, we have the A3, which is an AoE attack. It will decrease the turn meter of all enemies by 25%, presuming you have enough accuracy to do so. If her brother's on the same team, then it will decrease the amount by 50%, and then it cannot be resisted. So keep that in mind, that generally speaking, it's just going to be a turn meter decrease AoE attack. And from what I've seen from test server footage, the multiplier on this is not amazing. So it's not going to deal crazy amounts of damage for an AoE attack, but nonetheless, it can be some decent utility as far as turn meter control. It then fills her turn meter by 20% for each enemy alive after the attack. So if everyone still lives, you can boost your turn meter by 80%, depending on how many enemies are alive, assuming they're 4, like in an arena setting. That could be pretty substantial, and once again, kind of helps her cycle through her abilities relatively quickly. This is also on a 3-turn cooldown when booked. And then on the passive, her passive effect that is active at all times is that her turn meter gets filled by 50% whenever an enemy is granted an extra turn. So a Rotos, A1, anyone in a Relentless set, a mythical changing forms, any of those things will give her a big amount of turn meter fill, which will then, advance her in the turn order potentially cutting in. But of course, whoever got the extra turn is still going to take their turn first, so keep that in mind. She might just be killed whenever that champion goes after their turn. And then if her brother's on the same team, he will also get this effect of boosting his turn meter by 50% if the enemy is granted an extra turn. And then the active effect, which is on the 3-turn cooldown, is then if her companion is killed, it will automatically trigger her AoE attack here, so the turn meter decrease, which again, if they're combined together, then you get the full or the 50% turn meter drop that cannot be resisted. Her aura is attack in all battles by 30%, which is pretty decent. And as far as base stats are concerned, her HP is on the higher side for an attack-based nuker. Although I wouldn't really classify her as a classic nuker. I think she's more of a utility nuker. And so typically those kinds of champions have a little bit lower or weaker multipliers compared to like a Jorjid or a Half-Rack, people who just do pure damage and absolutely offer no utility. Their multipliers are typically higher, but someone who does different things, places debuffs, has turn meter controlling effects and manipulation and whatnot, they typically happen to have a weaker multiplier. So 1500 on the base attack, which is on the higher side, but again, I think her multipliers are fairly weak, so you're not going to see a crazy amount of damage out of her, but nonetheless, the A2 does hit decently hard when it comes to the arena. It can bypass UDK, so that's still pretty useful. Base speed of 100, so kind of in the middle, and then she gets the extra bonus crit damage for being a legendary. So as I mentioned, I am going to judge her in isolation because I can't assume that I'm going to get Hansel in the future, and so she's relatively underwhelming, but nonetheless, I think she's a pretty decent for a utility style nuker. However, as far as whether or not I'm going to actually use her on my account, kind of depends on whether or not I can get Hansel. I'd like to bank her in the future case that I happen to get them, and I would like to use them together, probably in like 3v3 arena, just because for reasons we'll get through when we talk about Hansel's kit. But nonetheless, I'd like to bank a champion because I'd rather have them and not need them than need them and not have them. That's kind of my philosophy. But of course, that's a given because I have an abundance of resources that makes fusions a lot easier to do in the end game. If we take a quick gander at Hansel, her brother, who has a similar amount of base stats, similar HP, higher on the base attack, same speed, same crit damage, and we take a look at his kit. He has the reflection of her A1 on his kit, where he has the chance to place the weaken, single target if he's alone, but when they're together it becomes an AoE, so they're effectively like an upgraded version of a blender comp like Sinesha and Skullcrown, where you can still get, you can add the debuffs in, decrease defense and weaken, on top of doing potentially multiple hits. So his condition is that if the enemies are under any debuffs, then they will get hit twice. So technically her part is a lot harder to activate because they have to be under a buff, and usually that buff in terms of arena is going to be like stone skin, or it's going to be block debuffs, and so you're not actually going to be able to land anything else. But nonetheless, in a normal blender type situation, you got an Arbiter, Ferric, and the Fat, and these two, then you might get decreased defense, you might get weakened, and then that will allow him to get his extra hit off. On his A2, attacks an enemy 2 times, will ignore shield and unkillable buffs, and it will grant an extra turn if he kills an enemy, so just a straight up damage ability on a 3-turn cooldown. And then I think this is mostly his bread and butter ability if you happen to have the pairing together. It's an AoE attack that ignores 50% defense and also increases the cooldown of one random skill on each enemy by 2 turns. But if they're paired together, then it will ignore 30% of each target's defense and then increase the cooldowns of all skills by 2 turns, not just one skill, and this effect cannot be resisted on a 3-turn cooldown. Now, this is where a lot of people say that, well, if you have a basher, then you don't really need this ability, and that is fair to a degree, but again, in my head, I'm thinking more about flexibility in tag team arena, where, yeah, I have basher, but I only have one, so he can only work on one of the teams if I wanted to run lockout. I don't have a warlord, I don't have a Yumiko, and so having a damage option that can also be a lockout and not require any accuracy at all in the build would be pretty useful to me in terms of flexibility and diversity of the teams that I could possibly use. That would give me a lot more counterplay with the stone skin meta that has kind of infected all of arena. But of course, that is completely contingent on me getting both of them. But like I said, I'd rather just get Gretel and hope for Hansel versus eventually happening to pull Hansel and then regretting not going for Gretel, right? I'd rather have and not need than need and not have, like I said earlier. On his passive, he's basically immune to fear and true fear. He's not quite to Shemail level where he can get rid of it on behalf of your entire team, but he can reflect them back on the attacker in any instance. And then if his sister's on the same team, then she also gets the benefit of this, reflecting all fears back together. So active effect, again, is a mirror of his sister's, where if she dies on the same team, then he will instantly activate this ability here, this AoE. But arguably, this is a lot stronger. So if she dies, you get this AoE, which will instantly lock out the entire enemy, which can be very, very powerful if you get that to work in the right order. So again, I do think as a duo for the arena, they're not going to work necessarily in live arena or something like that, but in classic arena, in 3v3 arena, they can offer some flexibility to people, assuming you get both of them. So if my musing have somehow convinced you, or you were already convinced to go for the fusion, let's talk about what it's going to take to get her. And honestly, we have a pretty standard old school traditional style fusion there with kind of no gimmicks, at least none so far that we can see. We have the standard 4 dungeon split. We have 2 classic arena tournaments. We have a champion training tournament. We have a champion chase tournament. We have 3 dungeon divers, we have 3 artifact enhancements, a champion training event, and then a summon rush, which is back to featuring the epic from the fusion. We haven't seen that in a while, or at least a little while relative to fusion, so it's kind of nice to see that old style of you being able to max out the summon rush, get the epic, skip a bunch of the events, etc., stuff like that. I typically don't do that. I usually just go, as you can see here, for the minimum, which I'm predicting here is going to be 2350, but I usually go for the minimum 4 sacreds and some mystery shards to get that done, but we'll get to that a little bit later. There's pretty much nothing extraordinary or noteworthy about this fusion other than the fact that it's traditional, meaning you are going to have to spend a good amount of effort leveling up all the champions, either in the campaign or in the tavern, ascending them, so making sure you have enough potions to do so, and we'll talk about that a bit later as well. And just making note that there are some pinch points, as I like to call them, which is an overlap between a dungeon tournament and champion training, which is just a use of a lot of energy in order to max out both of them. So you can see here that we'll start tomorrow with champion training overlapping with Ice Golem, and then later on champion champion training will overlap with Fire Knight. For those of you who are less familiar with the spreadsheet, which will be linked in the description box down below if you'd like to check it out for yourself, we have fusions going all the way back to Pythion, and we have documented all of the milestones for each of the fusions in the past, as well as the amount of shards that I happen to pull on my account to get them. You can see that I generally, like I said, minimize the summon rush and maximize the champion chase, etc. So you can look back a little bit and see some of the historical records and precedents for different milestones for different events and see the trends that have kind of been going on for the past couple of years. Over here on the right hand side, we have all the milestones for each of the different rewards. Anything marked with an asterisk means that it's a predicted or expected amount that will be confirmed once the event goes live in the game. These are based on historical precedent, so they should be fairly close to their actual values, but nonetheless, I reserve the right to always be wrong and incorrect because sometimes they do throw out curveballs here and there. There's also a row here talking about the fusion events that we predict. I'm thinking that it's going to be 2x Ancients at the time of this recording. I don't know. I haven't heard or seen anything to know exactly what it's going to be, but my guess is 2x Ancients. There's going to be a progressive chance events on the following weekend for the Summon Rush, and then I think this could be Sacreds out here. It's after the fusion, so it doesn't really matter, but it could also be Primals. That's kind of my guess. We also have a tracker for CVC, and more importantly, we have a tracker for each of the potion keeps and which day they are open. So if you are running low on the Void potions, make note that there's only going to be 2 instances of the Void Keep open during the course of the fusion, so keep that in mind to make sure that you're stocked up and proper on that one. But otherwise, you can check which of the days you need to check in with the Magic Keep in order to get the potions for the Epic, if that is of your concern. And then lastly, here at the bottom, we have an energy plan, which is how I plan to use my energy over the course of the fusion. It's not necessarily a recommendation or a guide for what you should do, but just documenting how I spent my energy over the courses of fusions. I alluded to it earlier, but here in the next tab here, the fusion potion calculator, we also have the inputs for Gretel Hagbane. So you can see that we have the 4 magic epics as well as the 16 void rares, and thus you need these amounts of potions to make sure that you can ascend everyone required for the fusion. Now let's talk a bit about the current events going on in the game, starting off with my overall supply count at the moment. I do like to talk about this at the start of fusions because a lot of people do say and believe that fusions are extremely difficult to maintain, but like I've said, I do every single fusion, and it is most certainly possible to do if you budget and allocate your resources currently, and of course you dedicate enough time and effort in order to get them done. So we're benchmarking it here at 86 million, on the silver, and then 3,900 on the gems, and we'll see how that's going to be by the end of the fusion. I post on my community tab a summary of the fusion events and how many gems and silver I spent over the course of it, so stay tuned for that in a couple of weeks after the fusion is complete. In terms of the ongoing events, we do have the Dungeon Divers event that is live, which is kind of odd because it's live before any of the other events are live, but nonetheless you can get some of the rewards or get started grinding towards the 3,700, which is a pretty standard milestone for what we've seen in recent days in terms of Dungeon Divers. It is painful. It is going to cost some extra energy, extra gems in order to get these, but nonetheless it is nice that we can kind of get started with it on day one. And for me, I'm still doing the Spider Turn Attack tournament, released for the rest of today, just getting as many points as I can in the meantime while I wait for the real events champion training and Ice Golem to start tomorrow, and then I'll go ham on those, make sure to max out divers and continue onward. There's also the Fusion Warm-Up event, of course, which I'm sure most of you have already been participating in, but it was just artifact enhancement, so that was nice. We get some energy. You can see that I'm saving these 2 nodes specifically for Champion Training, which starts tomorrow once again, and the Champion Training event there, you can see it goes live in 8 hours at the time of this recording. And then checking in on the tournaments, like I mentioned, they're not live just yet. You can see Ice Golem starts tomorrow, as well as the Champion Chase starts tomorrow, or later today, depending on how you want to think of it in terms of hours. And you can see that, like I said, the Spider Turn Attack tournament is where I'm going to be focusing my energy before like the reset and all the refills I'm going to get from that. I'm just going to be using the spare energy in the Turn Attack tournament until Ice Golem goes live. So there you have it. That is my fusion plan for getting Gretel Hagbane. I totally understand that she is probably seemingly underwhelming for a lot of people. Her multipliers are nothing to be desired, but again, I think she can be fairly decent in the arena. She's more of a sniper. I see her as a very good person to use the A2 against single target champions, kind of reset the skill, and hopefully go again just by going you build her fast with a decent amount of damage. She could just be a sniper kind of taking out people one by one by ignoring a ton of defense. And then, like I said, if they do happen to do it guaranteed, or you do happen to pull Hansel in the future, they can be a pretty nice utility combo that has some damage on top in terms of locking out your enemies so they can't do their things, and then obviously being able to whittle them down eventually with the amount of damage that they can deal. And so it's up to you whether or not you would like to do the fusion. Of course, I recommend that you do so if you can, but nonetheless, I understand that majority of people are probably going to skip this one just because of what they've seen from the test server videos. Let me know in the comment section down below what your plan is relative to this fusion. Are you joining me and getting her, or are you skipping or taking a break and working on something else to progress your account? As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel, and feel free to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching. Happy Halloween and have a good one.